Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Elephant Back Loop Trail in Yellowstone National Park. The park is seated on the side of the world's largest batholith volcano, which provides the energy for the geysers and geothermal phenomenon here. This area is around 8,000 feet high in elevation and is thickly timbered rolling hills overlooking Yellowstone Lake. The forests, primarily of lodgepole pine, are 150 to 300 years old and are described by the Yellowstone Board of Review report regarding this episode as gray and brown in color. Given the age of the forest and the amount of duff accumulated on the forest floor, many forms of edible fungi grow on the ground and deadfall trees. These fungi provide a valuable source of nutrients to animals in the area and perform a vital function in the ecosystem. Animals like elk, deer, and moose will often dine on mushrooms whenever they can find them. Of the predators in the area, only bobcats and cougars are not known to consume mushrooms, but wolves, coyotes, as well as black bears and grizzly bears frequently seek them out as fare. Elephant Back Trail climbs 800 feet over its duration, which is only 1.5 miles long. About 0.8 of a mile up the trail is a fork. The left route leads directly to the overlook, which grants visitors a stunning view of the lake. The right route winds a bit more, but ends at the same overlook. As far as trails go, it isn't much of a trail, as it only takes visitors an hour or so to complete the loop. But if danger were measured by distance, it may be one of the most dangerous trails in the world. On Thursday, August 6, 2015, 63-year-old Lance Crosby was performing his duties at Lake Medical Clinic, where he had worked for the past 5 years. He was a native of Billings, Montana, and an avid hiker and outdoorsman. Just before lunchtime, Lance's coworkers reported seeing him at the medical center. He had recently injured his ankle and was in the habit of going out for walks near the center to help it heal and rehabilitate it. Lance enjoyed taking shortcuts through trail circuits just to wander through the stands of trees. On this day, he took no firearm nor bear spray with him. His coworkers watched Lance walk off along the road toward Elephant Back Trail and returned to their duties. On August 7th, Lance was expected at the center for work, but didn't show up at the start of his 8 a.m. shift. The staff thought this was peculiar, as he wasn't the kind of person to be late, and definitely would have called in had he come down with an illness. By 9 a.m., the staff at the medical center called in and reported Lance missing. Park rangers immediately formed a search team, and foot search teams began searching on Yellowstone Lake Beach, Natural Bridge Road, and Elephant Back Trail. During the search on Elephant Back Trail, a ranger discovered a carnivore food cache with a boot protruding ominously from beneath it. The ranger immediately backed out of the area, and all hikers were ordered to leave to preserve safety and evidence. An investigative team comprised of law enforcement officers, biologists, and medical professionals was formed. After the report of the carnivore food cache had reached the team, they prepared for a body recovery. About a half-mile northeast of the trail, rangers heard a cub bark 3 or 4 times as they approached. They observed a sow with dark brown legs and a light brown rump running away from the cache site. Once at the site, the investigative team began gathering evidence. They could see grizzly tracks from one sow and at least one cub near Lance's body. The bears had partially eaten his remains and then covered him in dirt and pine needles, indicating they were planning on returning to eat the rest of him after digesting the portions they had already consumed. Lance's remains were removed by helicopter and analyzed by forensic experts. They found deep bruising and puncture wounds on his arms, hands, head, face, shoulders, and upper back, indicating that he was alive when these wounds were inflicted. He had attempted to defend himself during the bear attack, based on the location of the wounds on his arms and hands. The puncture wounds on Lance's corpse were measured for comparison with the teeth of any bear thought to have been involved. After further analysis, Lance was found to have died from blunt force trauma to the area near his brainstem. He had been struck by the sow's paws with enough force that the blows had caused his death. At the attack scene, forensic experts collected bear hair samples and bodily fluids from the bears. They discovered that the grizzly had killed Crosby in an ambush and left him with very little time to react. He was face down with his left arm beneath his chest and his left leg crossed over his right calf. I've posted pictures of the attack site sketched by the forensics teams, as well as the picture of the dead bear on my Patreon link below. These images would not pass YouTube guidelines, so you can see them there. They are disturbing, at least as disturbing as a sketch of a bear attack scene and a photo of a dead bear can be, so look at them at your own discretion. Lance's baseball cap was found near his left boot, and his body was buried right where the attack had occurred, meaning the grizzly had not dragged him away at all. The investigators also reported that she had not run upon him, but the attack happened from extremely close range. The soil around the attack site wasn't disturbed. There were no tissue or clothing fragments strewn about, and his possessions were found near his body. He didn't even have time to run. The biologists on the scene searched for natural feeding behaviors and evidence. Bear daybeds and scat were located right next to rock cairns and other human-created rock formations left by prior visitors. DNA evidence was pulled from scat piles, and profiles from a sow and a cub were identified. They determined that the bears were likely foraging for mushrooms, and Lance had walked right up to them just before the attack. They were likely devouring mushrooms or napping just afterward when the surprise confrontation occurred. Equipped with this knowledge, biologists set out foot snare traps at the attack scene, hoping to catch the sow when she returned to her food cache. The night following the attack, she triggered the snare, and it held her fast until bear researchers could tranquilize her. Upon confirming through DNA evidence and bite wound measurements that they had the right bear, officials ordered the sow to be euthanized. As for her cubs, they were also trapped in the following days. They were not killed, but authorities deemed them to possibly be conditioned to see people as food. They were sent to a zoo to live out the remainder of their lives. After euthanizing the sow, investigators determined that she was only 259 pounds, which is thin for a grizzly bear. She had invested much of her food in the 1-year-old cubs she'd been raising. Regarding euthanizing grizzlies, park officials stated that they do not take the matter lightly. Had the sow been determined to have acted in defense of her cubs, she would likely have been left alone, if not relocated to areas further from civilization. Given that she had consumed portions of Lance's body and cached his remains for later consumption, they had no choice in the matter. Lance Crosby's death was the 8th human fatality in Yellowstone since 1916, but the 5th since 1984. 44 people have reportedly been injured by bears in Yellowstone National Park over its 150-year history. Grizzly numbers are estimated to be over 1,000 bears in the greater Yellowstone area, with the park only claiming 150 to 200 grizzlies within its boundaries. That means the difference of up to 800 grizzly bears are spread all around Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. If Lance had been packing bear spray, would he even have had time to dispense it? Was the sow defending her mushroom feeding grounds, or did she predate on Lance? Do you think the cubs would have copied the behavior they saw the sow do and consider humans as a source of food in their future? That's an ominous thought. Grizzly bears in the zoo watching something they think of as food walk by and stare at them and throw peanuts at them all day. Will you cast an extra cautious glance over your shoulder next time you're out picking mushrooms? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Kenai Peninsula in southern Alaska. This huge jut of land pokes into the Gulf of Alaska and extends toward Kodiak Island. It has some high mountains in the southeast of the peninsula, but near Soldotna is a low-elevation plain that gently rolls into the Cook Inlet. The towns here push into the forest, which consists of birch, hemlock, and spruce trees. Common animals here include moose, porcupines, and hares. The predators on the peninsula are much more diverse, with weasels, foxes, lynx, and coyotes rounding out the smaller meat-eaters. The larger ones are much more dangerous and include wolves, black bears, and brown bears. The Kenai River originates at Kenai Lake, which is fed by the Russian River. It flows for about 50 miles as the crow flies and empties into the Cook Inlet near the town of Kenai. The salmon that migrate upstream begin their lives as fry, which grow in Kenai and Skylac lakes before making their way to the sea for a few years. Upon their return, the salmon continue a flow of nutrients from the land to the sea and back again that sustains brown bears, as well as many other plants and animals in the ecology. This cycle on the Kenai Peninsula has supported over 600 brown bears. But these bears are genetically isolated and are trending downward in numbers, according to recent assessments. They have a unique gene pool among brown bears, which would be a pity to see go extinct. Just a little east of Soldotna is a town called Funny River. It is a dot of a town, which doesn't seem like a town at all, but more of an incorporated area. Around mile marker 11 of the Funny River Road that runs through town, a 62-year-old man named Danny High had his home on an acreage. One of his favorite things to do was to take the dogs for a walk and enjoy the fresh air and beautiful scenery the Kenai River offers. Now, Danny's acreage was at an interesting location on Funny River Road. To the south is land owned by varying federal, state, and tribal agencies, which is left in its natural state. Here, brown bears can travel freely and fight and mate and do all the normal bear stuff. To the west and the east of Danny's property, housing developments and busy roads crowd the bears' access to the Kenai River and the salmon that they pull from it. But right near Danny's property, development thins, and access to the river is much easier for the bears. To find similar access to the river, the bears would have to go 6 miles to the east, just to avoid human development. This bottleneck in travel corridors creates a funnel for hungry bears and leads them on a path right to Danny's and his neighbors' doorsteps. On September 13, 2015, around 4:30 p.m., Danny was out walking the dogs along one of the many four-wheeler roads that crisscross the area. The trails make the perfect escape into the trees that surround the residential developments. Brown bears are a frequent sight on these trails, but locals are so used to being near them that their presence isn't even alarming. On his hike, Danny didn't bring a firearm, nor did he bring along bear spray. Danny was such a good neighbor, he would frequently take his neighbor's dog for a walk. The dog's name was Layla, and her owner was named Diane Deming. After Danny picked up Layla from Diane's house, the two of them disappeared into the labyrinth of quad trails for a quick escape. Diane knew they wouldn't be long, and expected them to return in about 30 minutes or so. Danny enjoyed one of the benefits of pet ownership without the responsibility of taking care of one. He often took Layla out for walks, and she seemed to enjoy them too. After he spent some time relaxing in the woods, the two of them would go back and resume their lives as usual. But today would turn out to be very different from most days. As Danny and Layla made their way into the nearby trees, another denizen was also using the quad trails. A huge brown bear was likely making his way along the Kenai River in search of salmon carcasses or berries to pack on weight for hibernation. It was mid-fall now, and if the bear didn't have enough calories, it might not make it through the winter, so every calorie mattered. At this point of the fall, bears are in a state called hyperphagia, which is a hormonal state of intense hunger and desire for food. They are known to cover much broader swaths of territory in search of food sources, and will sometimes seek food from sources they wouldn't consider in prior seasons of the year. If the berry season was poor, or the salmon run was meager, then bears would have no option but to push in closer to town in search of food. As Danny and Layla walked down the quad trail, at some point they crossed paths with this massive brown bear. The details of just how this run-in occurred have not been relayed or made public. The results of the incident left Danny with grievous injuries and sent Layla dashing back to Diane. At 4:36 p.m., Diane heard Layla scratching at the back door. Before she could let Layla in, she heard her scratching at the front door. Diane hurried back toward the front door and let Layla inside, but Danny wasn't with her. Diane thought that perhaps he'd let her run ahead of him, so she glanced down the road, but couldn't see Danny. After a few minutes, her questions were answered, as emergency vehicles began to blare their sirens and converge on a nearby location. There was no way Diane could know, but a brown bear had attacked Danny while he and Layla were out for a walk. After Danny was severely injured, he somehow managed to pull out his cell phone and call 911. The sirens Diane heard were responding to his own request for help. First responders were sent out to the attack location at 4:45 p.m., and the first unit arrived by 4:58 p.m. Although their description of Danny's injuries was not detailed, they were described as very serious. It took the paramedics only 5 minutes to request a medical helicopter to Danny's location. It ferried him to a hospital in Anchorage, where he was held in critical condition. Danny went through his first surgery there on Monday. With injuries beyond their scope of care, the hospital in Anchorage arranged for an emergency medical flight, which took Danny to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, Washington. After arriving at Harborview, additional surgical procedures would be completed to close and repair tissue damage the bear had done to Danny. Wildlife officers quickly converged on the attack site and searched for the bear responsible for Danny's mauling. Even though the search was thorough, it was fruitless in finding a bear in the area. Authorities decided to adopt a strategy of waiting out the bear to see if it would return and pose further risks to residents of the area. After the bear didn't return, they concluded that the attack was likely defensive and the bear didn't have predatory motives in attacking Danny. According to Danny's wife, his recovery was slow but steady. Given his proximity to town and access to immediate medical attention, his life was saved. Events could have ended up very differently for him if he were only a few miles away from the resources needed to save his life. From the time Danny left Diane's house with Layla to the point he called 911, only 6 minutes had elapsed. He was located a quarter mile from his home, which means most of that 6 minutes was spent walking with Layla and not being attacked by the bear. In only a few seconds, this bear did enough damage to Danny's body to threaten his life, in a location that would make the thought of this scenario unlikely. Due to the rapid response and availability of medical attention, he survived. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think bear spray would have prevented this attack? I kinda doubt it. Do you think Layla's presence may have been a contributing factor in the attack? Is the development around Kenai River an example of poor planning? The next time you take your dog out for a walk in the woods, will you be packing bear spray or a firearm? I'll gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Norwegian Arctic island of Svalbard. It's about 800 miles from the North Pole and 500 miles north of mainland Norway. Many areas in the Arctic are surrounded by cold ocean currents, which make them too cold to support plant life. Svalbard is surrounded by relatively warm ocean currents, which raise temperatures enough to allow for some plants to grow there. These currents bring warmer air to support the 2,026 species of mosses, lichens, fungi, and plants. The farther north and south you go toward the poles, the fewer species are present in ecosystems, and the more specialized they have to be. Caribou are an example of a specialized species and are the only large mammals on the island that are not predators. The predators on the island include Arctic fox and the polar bear. Svalbard was the center of a total solar eclipse on March 21, 2015. This stunning natural phenomenon occurs when the moon passes directly between the sun and the earth, disturbing light and shadow patterns. I experienced being close to the center of a solar eclipse in August 2017 in western Idaho. It was one of the most intriguing moments of my life, and I have photos to prove it. The announcement of the solar eclipse in Svalbard created a rush for reservations at area hotels and housing rentals. The region only has about 2,500 people, and many of them rented a room of their home out to one of the 2,000 eclipse fanatics for extra income. Svalbard is a beacon for ringed seals, walruses, and beluga whales, which are all primary prey for polar bears. Where you find prey, you'll find predators, and polar bears are plentiful here as well. Locals know that they need to pack firearms at any time when they venture away from civilization, but some visitors aren't so savvy to the rules. The authorities in the area require anyone leaving inhabited areas to carry a hunting rifle or be accompanied by a local armed guard. The danger polar bears present to unaware visitors is taken so seriously here that Ronnie Brunvall, the head of the Visit Svalbard organization, states that security is number 1, 2, and 3. On the evening of March 20th, 2015, 37-year-old Jakob Marvik was resting inside of his tent for the evening. He'd traveled to Svalbard with 5 of his friends, and they'd pitched camp along a snowbank for the night. With temperatures hovering below zero and light fading by early afternoon, the campers found comfort within their tents. Each tent in the expedition had a high-powered rifle leaning outside of it for easy defense against polar bears. The group also erected a security fence around their campsite, which would alert them to any approaching bears, and then they snuggled into their warm sleeping bags. The expedition also established a bear watch, and Mrs. Hakova was on duty this evening. She'd set up outside initially and eventually got weary, moving her bear watch inside to the comfort of her tent. She knew she could rely on the bear fence to alert her of anything serious, so she reclined with confidence. Jakob was an avid outdoorsman and loved to ski, snowboard, and snowmobile. He and his friends were from Prague, Czechoslovakia, and had made their arduous trip to the town of Longyearbyen with excitement. The expedition he was with had purchased a group package that permitted them to do these activities in the lead-up to and after the solar eclipse. It was supposed to be like a vacation for them, albeit a cold one. Unbeknownst to the expedition, the fence they'd erected had been placed too high. A hungry polar bear had been wandering the area, following its nose to its next meal when it stalked upon the camp in the night. It easily slipped right under the fence without tripping the alarm, exposing the sleeping campers to whatever the bear chose to do to them. As the polar bear noiselessly padded through the camp, the scent of sleeping people undoubtedly filled its nostrils. An overload of olfactory information was bombarding the bear's nose as it sniffed each tent in turn. For some unknown reason, the polar bear found Jakob's tent most appealing. The fabric of the tent was designed to resist the rigors of wind and snow, but not the claws and teeth of polar bears. Its claws ripped through the tent with very little resistance, and it was quickly inside, atop Jakob. Jostled awake by the polar bear's claws, Jakob opened his eyes to see the gaping maw of a polar bear less than 3 inches from his face. He yelled, "Bear! Bear!" as he scrambled to keep the bear's jaws from clamping down on his face. Using his hands, he repeatedly redirected the bear's jaws from his head. The bear used its paws to grab the man and drag him from the tent. Its claws tore long red streaks along his skin. In the tent next to Jakob's, Mrs. Akova had let her eyes close and drifted off to sleep during her bear watch. Her slumber was abruptly halted by Jakob's cries about the bear. She scrambled from her tent, clutching the revolver that she had packed with her. Upon emerging, she could see a huge polar bear striking Jakob with his paws, only feet from her. She raised her pistol and fired the revolver at near point-blank range, striking the polar bear with more than 2 of the rounds. The camp seemed to erupt in people yelling and screaming while they converged on the bear. It had felt the impact of the revolver rounds and turned in pain and confusion. The bear dashed off to avoid any further confrontation with the people and stared back at them from only a few hundred yards outside of camp. The campers reached out to local authorities, who soon arrived by helicopter to investigate the polar bear attack on Jakob. They were armed and began following the bear's blood trail across the snow. The bear was located and shot by them only 200 meters from the camp. They took the bear's carcass back to the lab to analyze it. They were interested in knowing the causes of the predatory attack. I found no source indicating the findings of this analysis. Even though no other campers were injured during this attack, the organizer of the expedition was fined $1,200 by local authorities. It was the first time the fine was evoked for a polar bear attack. It was issued because the organizers neglected to perform basic safety precautions to protect campers and bears. Following his attack, Jakob expressed eagerness to return to Svalbard and the beauty of the Arctic. His enjoyment of the area was not diminished due to the polar bear's predatory attack. However, he did express disappointment that the bear attack forced him to seek medical attention. Consequently, he missed the eclipse. Approximately 3,000 polar bears are living around Svalbard, and only 2,500 human inhabitants. Yearly, an average of 3 polar bears are killed by residents defending their life or property. There have been a total of 5 fatal polar bear attacks on Svalbard in the last 40 years. In an episode on our channel, Horatio Chappell's fatal polar bear attack was discussed, and I've linked to it in the comment section below if you're interested in watching it. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Why do you think the campers didn't test the bear fence before they went to bed? Do you think bear spray would have prevented this attack? Would you have the discipline to shoot a polar bear in such proximity like Miss Hakova? If I'm ever put in that position, I sure hope I'm that brave. I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.